A very, very warm welcome to Live from Leipzig, here from a moving tram. This, I don't know about you, but it's my first time I'm borrowed a tram to talk to people in this way. So we've been very excited to welcome you here. This is the second time we're doing Live from Leipzig. My name is Lotte Brøndum. I'm from the Global Alliance of NGOs for Road Safety, a network of NGOs working around the world for road safety. So last week we had the UN Road Safety Week, and the theme for the week was rethinking mobility, talking about how we move to sustainable mobility for cycling, for walking and public transport. So what's not to like here being on a tram today with you and talking about this theme? So with me today, I have Juan Carlos Muñoz, who is the Minister of Transport and Telecommunication from Chile. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I have Natalia Lleras, who is the Program Manager for Walk 21 Foundation. Welcome.
Yes, thank you.
And I have Veronique Feypell, who is the Road Safety Manager from ITF. Welcome.
Thank you.
By 2030, 70% of the world's population will live in cities. And this will obviously have a huge impact on how we live, how we get to school, how we live our daily lives. And obviously also on the environment, on health, on equity, on safety, and on road safety. So right now we see that the way people are moving around is in cars and it's on motorcycles. And we need really to move to much more sustainable transport modes. And that was the theme for the UN Road Safety Week last week. So I would like to start asking you a few questions around benefits of promoting this modal shift to public transport, to walking and to cycling. So why don't we start with you? What are the benefits of changing to more sustainable ways of moving around in cities?
Thank you, Lotte. This is the first time I've been in an interview like this. I'm very excited. Thank you very much for this invitation. And yeah, I think that our cities urgently need to move their transportation systems towards making sustainable transport modes more attractive. People have more and more choices, and we need to make cycling, walking, and public transport more attractive. I've been very excited here in Germany to see how many people, at least in Berlin, for instance, tend to take the bike, tend to walk. We have wonderful public transport systems, and that's what we need to do. And it's very interesting to see how these kind of transportation modes are beneficial for society for many, many reasons. Not just the environment, pollution, noise, also climate change, traffic congestion, urban cohesion. There's many reasons why all these public transport modes need to be promoted. And it's good to see that if we make them more attractive, we tend to tackle all these social objectives in a very effective way. In the case of Santiago, we are moving ahead in terms of trying to push public transport, making the buses more attractive, extending our metro systems. But we need to address here not just the public transport modes, I think, but also how the cities are organized. And that's more complicated, and it's more of a long-term view. If cities are too big, if the distances are too long, it's more difficult for us to convince people to take the car at home. So I think that we need to play with both hands, making public transport systems more attractive, but at the same time to address how the cities are structured.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know, Veronique, how about you? What are some of the benefits for modal shift?
Well, first, let me say that the International Transport Forum is so glad that the Global Alliance chose the ITF Summit to organize this panel in a tramway. This is clearly a very innovative way to discuss transport issues, and you really help us to think outside the traditional box. And this is really what we need, what policymakers need. And within the 2030 agenda, we do have sustainable development goals to achieve, and they are very ambitious. And without thinking outside the box, we will not reach them. So we really need to get inspired by your work, by the work of NGO, to get inspired and think outside the traditional box. And this also applies to modal shift. clearly our cities are suffering from congestion, as you said, noise, pollution, a lack of space, and we do need cities with less cars. And during the COVID-19 period, several of us discovered our cities, and we were just amazed to see how cities could breathe without cars. So, of course, I am not saying that we should go back to these very restrictive measures about mobility, but if we could have less cars on our street, we will be much better. Of course, it's much easier to say than to achieve, and it's clear that we need good services in terms of public transport. We need space for active mobility, and yes, we need good public transport as this one in Leipzig. And I will take the example of some Latin American cities where often it is much cheaper to ride a motorbike than to take public transport. And when we see the number of road deaths in Latin American cities and how this number has evolved in the past years, this is clearly not sustainable. And I guess you will agree with me, Juan Carlos, that as an example, I think in Chile, the number of motorcyclists killed nearly doubled in 10 years. So this is just not unacceptable, and we need to do something for this. So the ITF is going to launch tomorrow its 2023 Transport Outlook. And one of its key messages is that modal shift is needed to achieve sustainable and livable cities. And it also pleads for providing safe infrastructure for walking and cycling. And it's warning us that if we do not have safe infrastructure, if we do not have strong speed management policy, the risk of vulnerable road users will increase, and we might reach a much increased risk of pedestrian cycling on our roads. So we really need to make sure that when we think about modal shift, we think it with the needs of the most vulnerable people. And finally, just a word to say that we talk a lot these days about electric vehicles, but we should not forget that just replacing normal vehicles with electric vehicles will not solve the issue of livable cities. So we need to be very, very cautious about the issue of electric vehicles in cities.
Yeah. Natalia,
yes,
benefits of modal shift. What you're coming from the walking community.
Yes,
this is a conversation you are having, I guess, every single day. What are the benefits? What can we learn from you?
yes. Well, let's start with how we got to this tram. You know, we got here by walking, and even though it's a fundamental way of moving around the city, is inexpensive and it's also emission-free, it's often neglected in the planning and the policy development of our cities. So what we try to do is give walking the value, provide the value that is needed, measured, and also provide the infrastructure so we can improve the walking conditions for everyone. For the people that already walk, for example, it's also a way to make cities more equitative in terms of gender, because women walk more than men. We do more trips a day. We take children to school. We go grocery shopping. Everything we do is like walking distance within our neighborhoods. So I think that we need to let's say, start that shift. We need to start thinking about the people or the needs of the people that are already walking in the city, and also how we make the cities more inviting to walking, with safe infrastructure, with the regeneration of public spaces, and this will create more vibrant cities.
You have been talking about sort of that, making it more attractive, and that was also something you talked about, the characteristics of cities, and you talked about the gender perspectives, yes, and making more space and livable. What are your experience from Chile?
I think it's interesting that, and I would like to comment on the issue of walking and the issue of take care of how much focus you put on the electric vehicles, which I think are great. But if you think, even if you think of emissions of a city, the emissions of a city in a year depends on how many people live in the city, multiplied by how many trips each person does, the distance of each trip, how much energy you need for each distance, and then the emissions. and the electric goes only in the last factor. If you work in the other factors, for instance, and make your trip shorter, then most likely people will tend to use the most effective ways of transport. If the trip is short, then most people will take the bus, will take the tram, or will take the bike or walk. Mm-hmm. So the issue of how do we address environmental issues or climate issues with our cities in transport, it's, I think, putting all the energy in just electromobility is wrong, because it avoids you from focusing also in the other factors that will also allow you to take care of the emissions. So we need to take all of them. And I think most likely if you make, for instance, trip distance shorter, as Paris is in some way provoking with this 15-minute city, it's great, because then you not only address the issue of, well, if trips are shorter, you will be emitting less, but most likely if trips are shorter, it's more likely that you will walk. It's most likely that you will take a more sustainable public transport system.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, the point around the 15-minute cities and the density. City density, because I think that's core of a lot of the things, that if you have a dense city, it's closer to what you do. What have you done anything active in Chile around this?
In Chile, this is something that is hard to address. Sometimes the governance of the cities is something that is very fragmented, and sometimes from the transport sector, we tend to be addressing the city we receive, and very rarely we have the opportunity to interact on, well, how should we be designing the cities of the future. And I think, at least in my country, in Chile, we have a very loose way of governing the city expansion. It seems to me that if you look at European cities, for instance, there might be more control on how the cities expand, and how do you control for a given density around the main corridors. As we see in the city we're visiting, it seems that the density around the main corridors is higher than what we will see in the way our cities in Chile expand.
Yeah. So urban planning, it's urban planning,
yes.
Natalia, urban planning and walking, how does that go hand in hand?
I think I agree with everything Juan Carlos said, but I will also add that to think about walking, not only to move around the city just by as a main mode of transport, but also we often see in the cities that we work at that we have this perfectly built and designed bus stop, but there's no way to get safely to the bus stop, right? So we need to think about the whole trip and how all trips start and end by walking. So that's another thing that we need to include in the planning and the policy development of our cities.
Yeah. So Veronique, tomorrow the conference starts. We just left the conference center area and moving to town now. And tomorrow the conference starts and will take place the next couple of days. And this year's theme is sustainable economies, and how road safety can contribute to sustainable economies. So tell us a little bit about that theme and some of the thoughts around that.
So you're right. The main topic of this year's summit is how transportation can enable sustainable economies. And clearly, road safety is part of the equation and is closely related to sustainable economies. But let me start saying why road crashes does not lead to sustainable economies. We all know that road crashes kill about 1.3 million people every year, that several dozen million people are injured, that the young people are the most affected, as road crashes is the #1 killer for people aged 5 to 29. So this is clearly not sustainable. And these road crashes have huge impact in terms of grief, sufferance, pain, but also huge socioeconomic cost, whether it's human capital cost, whether it's health cost at hospital, where people injured in a crash will take the bed of someone who will need other treatment, whether it's administrative cost for the police, the firemen, the emergency service. So this is really a big impact on our economy. And the World Bank has estimated that road crashes cost each country around 6% of its GDP, each country. And in total, this amount to about $1.7 trillion a year. So this is really huge cost for the society. And what is of course sad is that low and middle income countries are affected the most by road crashes and by its cost, because 90% of fatal road crashes happened in low and middle income countries. So it's very difficult for them to cope with the cost that are involved. And in some of these countries, when a household is impacted by a road crash, it could be a descent to hell. It could lead the household toward poverty. So it's really a drama in terms of economic for these households. And even in high-income countries, what we see is that the most deprived population are much more affected by road crashes. And as an example, a recent study in London showed that the most deprived population in London was 2 times as likely to be involved in the fatal crashes than the least deprived population. And this is how clearly impacts in the mobility of the population, in the equity regarding access to education, to jobs, because when you live in the most deprived population, most likely you will be a vulnerable road user. You will ride or walk on the less well maintained roads. So this really poses problems in terms of equity. But then if you take the questions the other way around, is what will I earn, what will I save if I invest in road safety? Mm-hmm. And here there is clearly a real business case to invest in road safety. Mm-hmm. And recent data from the International Road Assessment Program, IRAP, showed that for each dollar invested in safer roads, you could expect a return of its investment of $8 in terms of life saved and people not going to hospital. So this is huge. So this is really a plea for investing in safer roads. And let me give you another example. In Western Australia, following the COVID-19 crisis, they decided to relaunch the economy by investing in safer roads and safer infrastructure. So instead of having a budget of around 20 million a year for safe infrastructure, they increased it to about 600 million over 4 years to massively invest in safe infrastructure. And with the double objectives of reducing the number of road deaths by around 30% in 3 years, and also by dynamizing the regional economies by creating jobs. So there is clearly a link between creating safer infrastructure and having a good economy.
Mm. Yeah. You touched on low-income countries, and just bringing back to the walking, and in a recent UNEP report showed that in Africa, on average, people spend 56 minutes walking, where the world average is 43 minutes. And there's obviously a lot of impact and good results on their pollution and on no fossil fuels and health. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the challenges that are faced in Africa around modal shift, or does it even make sense to talk about a modal shift in low-income countries, and particularly in Africa?
Yeah, well, this year we're having our walking conference in Rwanda, in Kigali, and we were recently there speaking to the governments, doing all the logistics about the conference. And yes, everyone walks a lot, but they're not conscious about walking as a main mode of transport. So it's often neglected in the planning of the cities. So what you see is we even had to remind people, like, yeah, how did you get here from the bus? Oh, walking. Yeah, that's the walking that we are promoting, not only using it as a long distance, which is how it's usually used, but also for to start and end a trip. But we noticed that this poverty is associated with motorization. The people want to start building roads, infrastructure for cars, and what this is, the impact is road crashes. And also, since we have so many vulnerable users, walking pedestrians, then they're impacted the most. So what we want to promote is also the safe infrastructure for them to use public transport, for them to use the bicycle also as a modal shift. And also reduce that walking, because sometimes it's not like a personal how do you say, selection or election choice. Thank you. I'm thinking in Spanish. It's not a personal choice many times. You're forced to, because there's no other way to get around. So how do we improve that trip in general? By improving the walking conditions and improving the public transport in these countries.
It's an interesting discussion to move into the choice discussion, because I think modal shift is very much one of having choices. You can choose whether you take your car or your public transport or walking or cycling. So it's one of a privileged perspective. What are some of the thoughts in Chile around that?
It's true, and it's in cities, as Latin American cities, where there's also a lot of segregation among the city of the conditions where you live, where poor people tend to live in one part of the city, more affluent sectors live in other part of the city. It's very unequal how people use the transport system. If you were to live in a more affluent sector, most likely you'll have all your services around. Most likely the job opportunities will be there, and therefore your trips will be shorter, and you'll be able to do more trips per day. While if you were to be a low-income person, your trips will be longer, and therefore the opportunities to taking advantage of the opportunities that the city offer are lower. So it's very important that we work also on how to distribute better the activities and the opportunities, the job opportunities, the study opportunities within the city, so that all can benefit. So it links to what we were talking before, that the importance of distributing the activities not only makes the city more effective, this 15-minute city, but also more fair, because otherwise it's more likely that the poor people will be the ones that will be suffering the poor distribution of the city. So yeah, we need to work significantly also in make our cities safer. As Veronique was saying, in our case, we realize that our country has very poor standards in terms of traffic fatalities. Chile is an 18 million, 19 million inhabitant country, where every year we have 2,000 people dying because of traffic accidents. If we compare with Spain, Spain is almost a 50 million inhabitants, so 2.5 times us. Still they have 2,000 people dying. So there's something they do that we don't do that make traveling in Spain much more safe, much safer than in Chile. And one of the elements that we have realized that is something that we don't do is that they control traffic and ticketing automatically. So in Chile, you need a policeman to say, oh, you know what, you were exceeding the maximum speed, the speed limit, or you pass a red light. And we were very proud to say that last January, we passed a law where we will be able in Chile to have this kind of system where ticketing could be done automatically. And based on international evidence, we foresee that 30% of fatalities will be avoided once we have implemented this policy, which is common in all OECD countries, but not in Chile. So we expect that by passing this law and implementing it effectively, we foresee that 600 people will stop dying in Chile every year because some of the fatalities, some of the crashes won't happen, or those that still happen will be less severe.
Yeah.
And that's something that we feel very proud about our administration. It's something that we're moving ahead.
I just would like to reflect on what Juan Carlos just said, is the importance of speed management.
Yeah.
And reducing speed is clearly the number one priority in all the countries and cities. And there is just a modelization that says that if you reduce the average speed by 1%, you will reduce the number of fatal crashes by 4%. This is a modelization, but when you look at real figures, it's in this magnitude of order. So there is much to win in managing speed, and clearly automatic speed control has proven to be very, very effective. And there are experiences in France, in Spain, in Italy. So I am very, very glad to hear that Chile has been able to introduce automatic speed control.
Yeah, and I would like to add that that's the big difference between the global south and the north. You know, it's the speeds, the speed limits are there, but they're enforced, or the infrastructure won't allow you to drive faster, which is basically a way to keep everyone in the road safe. So I think that speed management is also the key to improving road crashes and also creating healthy and safe environments for walking and biking.
Yeah. Yes, if we go back to the Stockholm Declaration following the ministerial meeting in 2020, there was a plea to introduce 30 kilometers per hour in the city center where vulnerable road users mix with motorized traffic. And I really think this is a very, very important measure. So I don't know how far you have been thinking about this in Chilean cities.
Yeah, we have implemented several 30 kilometers per hour areas. However, it's hard to enforce if you really need somebody to be there to take the ticket. Now, we are quite hopeful and expected that once we have these cameras that can check that everyone is really respecting the maximum limit, then safety standards will be improved. We need to be very careful now. We're writing the rules for this, or the documents which allow us to implement this new system, and we need to focus on those places where we actually see fatalities, and we need to also inform the driver that they are being observed, because the focus here is not really to pass tickets and to get money. The focus here is to save lives, and that's why we are now expecting that this new law will allow us to have very important social benefits, very aligned to what Veronique was saying some minutes ago.
Yeah, and what you also done in Chile is that you approved an automated center for traffic infractions.
That's the law that we just passed, and now we have to. We are in the process of trying to implement this. We have a certain number of months, it's like a year, to write all the documents on how this will be actually implemented, the technologies that will be used, what will be the methodology to decide where this should be implemented, or the cameras should be installed. Also, the interface with the judges, with the users, with the system. So that's what we're going to be doing during the 2023, and by 2024 we expect this to be implemented.
Yeah, and how did you get inspired to do this? How do you decide the best actions to take?
Mostly based on international evidence. I mean, the comparison I made between Chile and Spain is very relevant. I was an academic myself before being a minister, and I wrote a paper with some colleagues about what are the most cost-effective measures for reducing the fatalities in Chile? And this was number one. So I was very proud to see this happen, or to participate on making this happen last January.
That's the minister that's evidence-based.
Evidence-based.
Makes decisions based on evidence. That's always to be applauded. I'd like to get back to some of the things you talked about, Natalia, around sort of the experiences in Africa, in low-income countries, and the choices, and how can we sort of ensure that Africa is not making all the mistakes that we have made, and how modal shift and the walking and cycling is really the preferred options, and not the cars, because we see a lot of influx of not very good cars and very safe cars. But how can we? What's your take on experience in learning?
Yeah, I think we need to highlight the value of walking. Not only the health benefits and the pleasure it brings to walk around the city, but also in the planning, including the infrastructure, make sure we have safe infrastructure that will promote walking. Because if you decide to, for example, take the bus, go to the bus, and there's no way to go to the bus stop because, there's a high-speed road that, it's acting like an obstacle to get there, then you're going to decide it's better to use a car, right? It's better to buy a motorcycle because I cannot cross this road. Or every time I'm going to cross it, it takes half hour while the cars keep going, So I think it needs to be valued and included in the planning and the policy development of these cities to make sure it's not forgotten or neglected. So that would be the key to improving walking in the cities, not only creating safe infrastructure, but also regenerating public spaces, making it a vibrant city where you want to walk. That I think is the key.
Yeah. And this is back to, so we have a stop now, and we are bringing some people on board who are coming here. So just if you hear a little bit of noise, that's that's why. We are on a tram.
You're used to this.
Yeah, you're used to stop,
Yes.
and you're used to a little bit of noise. So welcome on board.
Hello.
Hello.
So I don't know if you have listened into our conversation, but we just continue here, and welcome to our ride. So let's continue. We were just discussing. I think we were sort of we're circling around a lot of the city planning,
Yes.
and how city planning can really contribute to the safe environment. Veronique, what are ITF helping us with in terms of city planning and ensuring that the best lessons learned around the world are really shared with all your member countries?
Well, this is clearly the raison d'être of the ITF, is to promote best practice, to gather at the ITF summit or during other meetings the best experts in the world so that we can share and learn from each other. And regarding African countries or other developing countries, we need to make sure that they don't repeat the mistake that high-income countries have done. So they do not need to reach a peak in motorization before realizing that this was a mistake.
Yeah.
So it's very important to pass on this message, but it's now time for them to promote active mobility, that cycling is trendy. Of course, it was trendy in Copenhagen and in Denmark for many years, but in my home country, France, we just realized it after COVID-19 that cycling was trendy. And this is very important that the message gets spread and that we do recognize walking and cycling as really integrated mode of transportation and as a way to behave today in cities.
A problem there, I think, is that very often cities tend to deal with cars and traffic as a problem when it's too late, when there's too many. And I think that African countries might have the opportunity to hinder the use of the car when there's still space, there's still urban space for the most you want to promote. And because otherwise, when they are already 30% of your trips, the population and the political power of car drivers is significant, and it will be will make more difficult to really take those bold actions that make cities move from a car-oriented city into what we're seeing here in this environment where you've seen around this tram not only great quality public transport, but also a lot of people biking and walking.
And no congestion.
And very little congestion, exactly. And you do this by taking urban space for cars, and it's much easier to do that when the car traffic is low than it has already reached, let's say, 30% of the mobility of the city.
Also when it's an option, because in many cases there's no option but to buy a car. So we need to make it an option to use the public transport and active mobility.
So public transport, what does it look like in Santiago?
Well, I think Santiago has very important attributes that make it very exemplary. In terms of, one, we have a great metro system in which around 140 kilometers, six metro lines would allow us to reach different corners of an 8 million inhabitant city. We also have now we have invested in improving our bus fleet, and we have like 6,500 buses, and now 2 out of 3 are either electric or Euro 6. And we're moving towards making it fully electric for the next bidding processes. Now Santiago is the city with more electric buses in the world, outside from China. So China is in a different league. Outside from China, Santiago, we are about to reach 2,000 buses that are electric. And a very important attribute in Santiago is that all public transport services are fare integrated. So you pay around $1 US dollar, and you're allowed to travel around the city, moving from one transport mode to another, which I think is great. And also all our transactions are made with a touchless card since 2007. So these are attributes that make public transport in Santiago, I think, attractive. Still, people complain, and the frequencies are sometimes for some people are not high enough. But we also have the issue of how do we make it more cost effectively, because public transport subsidies, of course, have other possible uses that we need to be very careful to be effective enough to place them in the city. So Santiago, I think it's in a good shape in terms of the public transport system, and our main problem now is how can we improve public transport systems in the rest of the country, where the cities have none of the attributes I have just mentioned.
And some of the experiences, I guess this is very much about buy-in from the communities and the people who are using it. What have been your experiences around this? Has it been you providing the transport and then people have understood that this is a good idea? Or how much campaigning, or what did it take to get people on the electric buses?
Well, this is something we have been
to appreciate
we have been learning that it's not just the authorities that should come with say this is the public transport system you need, but instead develop all the participatory processes that will allow citizens to tell you what are the kind of services that should be offered in terms of not only what are the itineraries, the trajectories, what are the times of the day in which the services should be offered, what are the frequencies that are needed, and so on and so forth. The quality of the bus, attributes of the car. Sometimes these things where you can hang are too high, and for low people they are not high, not low enough, and they cannot use them. There are a lot of elements that need to be considered when you're designing a public transport system in which you will benefit a lot from hearing what users can tell you.
I think New York had the experience of creating bike lanes, and did that before there was a public demand for bike lanes, and by creating them and making it safe, they showcased it as an opportunity. How can we promote walking and cycling in that way by providing and also get the buy-in for community at the same time? You talked about Africa. You talked about how we need to make that choice an easy choice.
Yeah.
How can we do that? How can we get the buy-in from those who actually want to use it? Because if they put pressure on people like you to make the right decisions.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about one is to make it participatory, to understand the issues or the risks that they're taking when they walk or cycle. And the other one is to talk about safety in a holistic way. So road safety is one thing, but also personal safety is an issue in many of our countries. So for example, as a woman, I decide not to use the pedestrian bridge at night because it's too dangerous to go up there. I would have no exit if anything happens. So my decision would be to cross the road and risk my life that way, because I'm also risking my life the other way. So I think we need to focus on also those risks that people are facing when they use the public space. So is it I don't know, robberies? Is it too dark to walk there? Is it also sexual harassment? When I walk around, is there always a spot where people or men say things to me that I don't like? So I decide to take another route, which is longer, to walk in that sense. So I think that we need to make it participatory to understand these other risks that are not so obvious with the infrastructure and with the data we already collect, and make sure we also address them with infrastructure or other techniques to make sure the trip is safe and people decide as a choice to walk. Yes.
Yeah, we have done a couple of innovations that I think are very interesting, maybe for other cities to consider. In terms of safety for buses, we are very happy with a technological innovation in which we implemented in a set of buses what they call automated driver assistance systems. Very often, if you're a bus driver and you're going around the city in a conventional bus, you will not see some areas around your bus. They're kind of blind spots, where there could be a bicycle, there could be a person, and we've seen in the past buses going over these people with, of course, fatal consequences. And these systems are allowing our buses to be safer. And I think that kind of innovation allows us for reducing the fatalities. And now all new buses are required to come with this kind of systems. We have also improved somehow to foster the use of the bicycle. We have allowed bicycles to be taken in the metro on Sundays first, but it is great because allow people to use the bike and bike not only around their area where they live. As I said, especially in Latin American cities, the neighborhoods are very segregated. So if you live in a poor area, all your area around will have very little services. But by using the metro on your bike, you can now bike somewhere else. And we have also implemented some ideas on how to make public transport more effective and more efficient. In Santiago, in our metro, we have what we call express services, in which in a single line, you run express services by by making your train stop every other station. And by stopping every other station, since you still have a very high frequency, you can allow your public transport service to be faster. So I think public transport and all the ideas that we're discussing should be taken as innovative as possible. We cannot solve the urban sustainability problem by doing what we've already done, and we have tried many times. We need to be innovative, we have to think and to put those ideas into action. And if they don't work, well, you can take them back.
So Natalia, you talked about the entire journey, looking at the journey from you step out of your door until you actually are at your destination, and look at the entirety of the journey. And you talked about, also making sure that the convenience is there. A little bit more words around the entire journey and how we make sure that everything is safe and the safety aspect of it. How can we do that?
I think the first thing is to base your decisions on data. Because, for example, in Bogota for 10 years, we had the same amount of road crash fatalities every year. No matter what was done, it was always the same. So what we did is also base ourselves on data, and we decided to implement this speed management program. That was a previous experience I had, and that in 6 months dropped down the number of fatalities. So in a way, what I'm saying is the first thing to do is to gather data to understand what's happening and what's the issue and how can I improve it, and also use those other examples, as Veronique was saying, of cities that already went through that. So you skip some steps and you say, well, we are here. How do we get there without doing all this? Because they already done it. Mm-hmm. So base yourself on best practices is also a great case to improve safety quickly. In this case, it was speed management, but it could be also black spot treatment. It could be infrastructure improvement. For example, as I was saying, we call them the anti-pedestrian bridges because they're really used to, let's say, to prioritize cars and speeds. So to say, we're putting at the level crossing here to make sure, the walking is not 10 minutes because you had to go up and down, it's also an improvement. So it's also to understand with data, what are the issues in your city and how to improve them following best practices around the world.
Yeah. So make the journey easy, use the data that you have, use the populations, the inputs. How do we make sure that NGOs are involved in that? That's the role of NGOs, to make sure that there is a community, there's a demand from the communities.
Yes.
What are your experiences in the role of NGOs in creating these demands?
Well, as I started this session, I think that you are great in thinking outside the box, and you really inspire us, the policymakers, in thinking something else than traditional measures, because we've seen the limit of traditional measures. So in the new decade of action for road safety, we really need to go and have an innovative thinking about how to change urban space, how to make roads safer. So we are very, very happy to listen and learn from you as well.
That's great. And I think last week we saw the UN Road Safety Week with all NGOs around the world pushing for innovative ways of highlighting the need for modal shift. We had NGOs taking their decision makers on a show and tell, go take a walk and show them where the problems are. We had car-free days. We had a lot of different things around the world. So there's definitely a lot of innovation, but we also need to make sure that it's happening, and that's why we're all here. We can't do things alone. I think we're short of time. How long time do we have left? 5 minutes. Okay, good. We can talk a little bit more.
So let me comment on that. I think that one of the responsibilities or the opportunities for NGOs is to share the good ideas. We're talking here, there's a lot of innovations around. And if you were to look at Leipzig and you see how the street is organized and how the space is distributed among different modes, that is very innovative for many cities in the world. And if you were to show this happen and you were to show what are the impacts, well, many cities could follow. I think that we need to share the design, the operational schemes, the policies that are working and are allowing us to shift away from the motorized vehicles, the individual motorized vehicles, towards those more sustainable modes. And this is a difficult path in which we need to be brave. You need leadership. We also need to be very coherent in terms of how we move around so that we use the transport modes that we're fostering.
Yeah, and I think it's also a matter of advocating for the implementation of good ideas, but also supporting the implementation of those ideas, which is also needed by some governments. You know, it's we're doing this and the community is against us. How can we support the implementation, showing the benefits of walking, of cycling, of public transport? So it's a matter of also working together to make sure things happen.
Yeah. So creating a public demand is one of the roles of NGOs. Definitely make sure that they support to the safe options and opportunities there are. I think a couple of times we have now talked about COVID and not also and during the opportunities that actually came to us, not knowing that they were actually opportunities, and how we should never let a good crisis go to waste. What are some of the main things that you think we learned from COVID in terms of safer transport and sustainability?
Well, what we learned from COVID is that cycling was really an important part of the transport system. And we saw that cities, at the beginning, they were a little bit unsure on how they will absorb this increased volume of cycling. And then we have seen that many cities really improved very quickly the road infrastructure to absorb this amount of cycling. In my hometown, Paris, it's amazing the number of provisions that were just installed in a very short amount of time to absorb the cycling, and now they stay forever. So this crisis really was a game changer. It's a way to view how active mobility will play a really important part in the transport system of our cities.
Yeah. And
well, yeah, in Santiago we have a similar process, and if I were to compare how we entered the pandemic and how we left, unfortunately, I think we're leaving with more cars. I don't think we took those bold actions in which we could have fostered more, for instance, public transport or bike. Of course, public transport was difficult because of the number of for the density inside the vehicles. But we ended up with systems with more cars than we had at the beginning. We have seen more bike trips, and that's really encouraging. And we expect that by adding more infrastructure, which is key for bike use, we could continue that growth in terms of the number of people that take the bike as their daily way of moving around. Our countries, in our cities in Chile, are sometimes have a geography in which you need to take some slopes, but still I think they're pretty good for many of them for bike use, and we have seen systematically growth in terms of bike users, showing that the conditions are there for them to use. Unfortunately, the number of users of public transport. At now is like 70% of what we had before the pandemic. And we need to keep it growing. The good part is that the density inside the vehicles is not as high as it was before they started, which is making it a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah. Those will be the last words. Thank you very much for taking the ride with us here from Leipzig.
Yes.
I have really enjoyed discussing this with you. It's been great inputs, and I hope you have enjoyed it back home. Thank you very much for joining us here live from Leipzig. We're going to a conference the next couple of days where we're going to discuss modal shift much more, and I hope you will do that as well. Congratulations with a good UN Road Safety Week, and take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.